Okay, so last time we left off with the key features of the seed plants and talking about what makes them different and evolutionarily more adaptable and competitive than the non-vascular seedless plants and then the vascular seedless plants. So what we're going to do now is take a look at the earliest group of seed plants to appear. These are known as the gymnosperms. Now, gymnosperm, big caveat here, gymnosperm is not a scientific level of classification. It's not a kingdom, a phylum, anything like that. It is an organizational term. Like we group them together under this category because all of these phyla of plants have similarities. They have common themes or common structures. And the big common theme, if you're a gymnosperm, is that you have naked seeds. So you're producing seeds, you're vascular, and your seeds are what we call naked seeds, meaning they do not have fruit and this other protective stuff around them. They have a basic seed coat, but the seeds often are exposed. So the typical example, and there's other non-typical examples of gymnosperms we'll talk about, but the typical example that most people were probably familiar with are pine trees. Pine trees are a type of gymnosperm. And you think about a pine cone. So there's the pine cone right here. This is the pine seed. That seed would sit on this cone. The structure right here is known as the scale. And what we would see is the seed would sit right here. Actually, it should be further in. And then that little wing structure usually points to the outside. That way the wind blows it out of the seed. By and large, with pine trees, wind dispersal of their seeds. But back to the point here, naked seeds. You don't see big fleshy stuff around this. You don't see protective fruit, things like that wrapped around the gymnosperms. All their seeds tend to be exposed. So within the gymnosperms, there are 4 phylum that I want you guys to be familiar with. And these phylum are easy to remember. It's very similar to the fungi. If you remember the fungi, the name of the structure kind of told us the name of the phylum. Okay, so again, making this easy, name of structure often refers to the name of the phylum. So the first group to mention will be, let me get back here. Coniferophyta. This is going to be made up of plants we call conifers. So that's going to be one of the phylum we're going to take a look at, Coniferophyta. The second one to mention is Cicadophyta. The plants in this particular phylum, cycads. So see the connection? See how easy this is? If you miss these on the quiz, man, keep it simple. Third phylum is the sure it spells right. The Cnidophyta. These are going to be the cnidophytes. The most common one, and we'll talk about it when we get there, is the ephedra. And then the fourth one are the ginkgo, or the fourth phylum is Ginkgophyta, and the example there is the ginkgo. All right, so hopefully it makes it pretty easy to work with as we go through the gymnosperm phylum and we talk about them and go, okay, what's unique, what's kind of special about each of these different phylum, what makes them different from each other, and what's the key information about them, right? So away we go with phylum Coniferophyta. So very, very impressive phylum. You look at these guys, there's broad diversity here. We have fir trees, larches, sequoias, junipers, pine trees, etc. Odds are you may have these in your yard or in the neighborhood or in the park, or go look for them. Look for some of these. I mean, obviously some of them do not live or are not native to this environment. So we're not going to see a sequoia in central Illinois, but go out and look for coniferophyta. Go find some of those conifers. See what you can come up with. This phylum, it's an old, evolutionarily old group. So this phylum actually has some pretty amazing members within it. They actually hold some records when we talk about plant diversity. The giant sequoia holds the record for being the most massive living organism on the planet. The tallest, biggest, most massive sequoia on record was 267 feet tall and 77 feet in girth. So girth is, circumference, wrapping around it. 77 feet. That's literally 14 people laying down from head to toe to make a circle around this thing. That is just massive. It's huge. So think about how old that plant is. The tallest tree on record is the giant redwood. The tallest one known is 364 feet. These things are so big and so huge, you can actually drive cars through them. So something I want you to think about. So this tree is so big. Look at the picture down here. It is so big that a tunnel was cut through the trunk of the tree in order to let cars drive through. And the tree is still alive. So think about plant structure, all the features and parts and pieces we talked about. Think about how that could be done. To actually cut a tunnel through a tree and the tree is still alive. You cut a tunnel through a person, that's not a good thing. But that tree is still alive and growing and living and reproducing and doing everything with a tunnel cut through it. So pretty amazing. All right, the other record holder is the bristlecone pine. The oldest known bristlecone pine, the oldest known living organism, is a bristlecone pine that goes back 4,900 years. Imagine what that tree has witnessed. Think about the history of life that that tree has experienced over the last almost 5,000 years. That's just amazing to think about. We have no animals that we know of that have that longevity. Just an amazing feat for one single organism to live that long. So, okay, so let's take a look at phylum Coniferophyta and figure out what are the key things here. Well, this group evolves roughly 305 million years ago. So this is when we see conifers appearing on Earth. In general, we call them evergreens. But that's not a real good term. It's okay, but it's definitely not scientific. Most of these guys are adapted to dry conditions. Now, dry could mean not a lot of water. It can also mean water that is frozen. So you think about Illinois is not native, the native or the natural environment for pine trees. If you want to go to a pine forest, typically we go north. We go to areas where it's colder and we see conifers. They're adapted and evolved to those conditions of frozen water. You think about the needles. The needles are the leaves of the pine tree. They're evolved to decrease water loss. So that little needle, that kind of pointy needle, decreases water loss because it's thin, it's rolled up, it's very waxy. It's got this really thick waxy cuticle, and it helps decrease water loss out of the leaves of the pine tree or the conifers here. When we look at protection, they will produce resin, or we could call it a protective sap. So that sap helps decrease predation and offers a certain degree of protection. So insects, birds, whatever, try to attack or eat the plant, and that sap oozes out. So if a conifer gets injured, cut the branch, or damage the trunk, that resin oozes out, kind of seals it over to try to decrease fungal infections or bacterial infections, things like that. So huge advantage, huge defense advantage. And the other thing to mention about the conifer or coniferophyta is that these guys are monoecious. Now, monoecious means you have one plant with male and female, we'll call them parts, reproductive structures on that same plant. All right, parts. So right now I want you guys to take a moment and go, okay, if you had an animal that had both male and female reproductive structures, what term would we use for that animal? In the plant world, we call those plants monoecious. There's pros and cons of this. And that's what we'll talk about here as we start talking about the life cycle of a typical conifer, like the pine tree. So some of the key things to note about this life cycle. The sporophyte is dominant. That's what we're looking at in the picture right here. And there needs to be a transfer of sperm to the ovules. This is what we call pollination. And seeds develop from fertilized ovules. And the only way this is going to happen is through fertilization and development. So you can have pollination, but it doesn't mean that you're going to have fertilization and development of the seed. So it's, an important thing. You got to get pollinated before you can fertilize, and then hopefully you get fertilized and everything works out. Okay, so let's take a look at how this happens. Okay, so in order for reproduction to happen in the conifers, we need two different types of cones. One cone is known as the pollen cone. This cone will produce what we call the microsporangia, sperm / pollen. All the same stuff, guys. In the springtime, if you go out, if you live in an area that has conifers and you go out to your car and you notice there's this kind of yellow powder on it, that's pine pollen. That's pine sperm. Wind is blowing it out of the pine trees all over the place. That's what's in the air. Anybody with allergies in the springtime usually, it's because you're breathing in pine pollen, pine sperm. So there's this little window, and I'll get into that in a minute here. It's a little window in the springtime where this is going to occur. There also need to be seed cones. And seed cones produce omegasporangia, the eggs. Ovule structures here. All right, so you got a male cone, female cone. Think about in the non-vascular plants, we talked about Antheridia and Archegonia. Same concept. Both of these structures are found on the same plant, which again makes them monoecious. And in the big picture, it takes about 3 years from cone production to producing a mature seed. All right, so in the next lecture, we'll take a look at this process and walk through the steps of it.